Hi there. I'm going to show you the interface of Unity. We're going to be using Unity to make a virtual world. First, we'll start making a 3D sort of first-person walking simulator kind of a world, and then we'll work up to attaching a headset and getting into VR. But first, we got to learn our way around the software. I have this sample project that I've made. I'm going to use this to show you. On the left side, there is a window labeled Hierarchy. This is sort of like a text-based list of all of the objects in the project. These are all called game objects in Unity. Even if you're not making a game, that's what they call them, game objects. So everything from this floor to the terrain to each of these cylinders is an object. It can either be selected here by clicking on the name of it, or we can click directly on it in the next window over, the scene view. And this is where we can visually build our project. I'll tell you more about how to navigate the scene view in a minute, but those two things in conjunction help you build all the visuals of your project. The other thing that's going on in the hierarchy is there are things that might not necessarily be visual. Things like the camera that we see the game through, or the background music, or the lighting, even potentially like pieces of code that aren't visible at all are also game objects. You can even use empty game objects just as placeholders, like this one that just has a bunch of equal signs. I just use that as a line just to organize my list here, because everything above the line is kind of like a visual environmental object, and everything below the line is sort of invisible and is part of what makes the game function. So game objects can be used in that way too. They can also be sort of a way to create folders. That's not really the right word, but there's a concept called parenting in Unity, and a parent object like this one called house can be twirled open, and it has children inside the parent. So house really isn't anything at all. It's just an invisible game object, but it has wall, fallen wall, and some lights inside of it. So that and this roof, I could like put that inside house if I want. So the roof becomes part of house, and if I want to select the whole house, I've got it. So that's some of the stuff we can do in the hierarchy. Like I say, this is the scene view, and that's where we're going to sort of get our bird's eye view of our whole scene. I'll explain how to navigate in here. You can right click and drag around to sort of rotate your camera. If your camera has a scroll wheel, you can scroll in and out. That is to say, if your mouse has a scroll wheel, you can scroll your camera in and out. And then you can click the middle button or scroll wheel to sort of pan and tilt, So the combination of those things, you ought to be able to move around your scene pretty well. If you find that you are zooming in like too big of chunks, like I would like to get close but not this close, it can be useful to hold right click, and then now that your cursor is an eye, you can actually fly around with WASD, and you can sort of like move where you're flying to. I think the arrow keys will also function in the same way. No, it's not true. The arrow keys function when you don't have the right click held in. So those are some of your options to sort of move around, get where you need to go in your scene view. Now, this is an overview of the world I'm building, but it's not the view the player sees. That's hidden in a tab next to scene called game. And so this is where my player starts, and this is their view through the camera's eyes. This isn't me playing the game, this is just where the camera is sitting right at the beginning. If I want to play the game, I hit play up here. And then, so long as your game is functional and nothing's waiting to be fixed, there's nothing broken, you can do a preview of the gameplay. Now, from a blank Unity project with nothing in it, there won't be any gameplay to play, but this does let you have a preview as you build to see what you've built. When you're done, you need to hit play to stop playing the game. That's important because if you try to make changes to an object while the game is still playing, they won't be permanent changes. They'll only be like changes that happened during gameplay, but they won't actually change your project. So you can't really work on your project while you're playing your project, so to speak. Some folks using Unity, I see it's a pretty common customization of the user interface. People seem to like to have game and scene up at the same time. So if you'd like to pull this tab off of this center window, you can do that. You just click the game tab and pull it away. It can either float as its own window, or you can stick it to the side here and then resize. So you can sort of have like, okay, this is where I'm working on the project, but then I always have a view of what the player is seeing. And then if I hit play now, I can play the game without losing the scene view, and I can actually watch my character move around and make sure everything's working as intended. Okay, but I'm gonna put game back over here for now. So to continue the tour, we've done the hierarchy, we've done the scene view, and then to the right of the scene view, there's what's called the inspector. The inspector shows all the properties and components that each game object has. So right now, I happen to have the house parent object selected, which, remember I described the house isn't really anything. It's sort of just a parent container for all these walls and stuff. So a simple object like that doesn't have much in it, all it's got is a transform, which is position, rotation, and scale. So if I wanted to reposition the entire house, I could do it by sliding these numbers back and forth. I could edit undo. I could rotate it. I could scale it up. And I can also do things like that inside the scene view. So you might have noticed this 3-arrow cursor. You can use that by clicking on the arrows to move things up, and then notice in the transform over in the inspector, the Y position is moving up and down. So whether you do it in the inspector by typing in a number, like let's just make this 1, and it goes up a little bit, or whether you do it in the graphical user interface over here, they're both intertwined. They both refer to the same thing, just different ways to work. You can also not just move the position, but change the rotation and the scale over here with your mouse. You just have to change your mouse's tool. So there's a toolbar up here above the hierarchy that lets you change from the move tool to the rotate tool. So this would let us rotate by grabbing any of these rings around the circle. Next to the rotate tool, there's a scale tool. So this would allow us to scale in one direction, or if we grab the square that's connected to all 3 axes, you can change the scale all at once, so that it stays in proportion. So that's what the transform does for any game object. But some game objects are going to have a lot more components than just transform. For example, this ball I've made over here on top of the mountain, the red sphere game object, it has a transform that tells it where it should be and how big it should be, but it has a number of other things as well. And as we learn Unity, you'll learn more and more of what each of these do, but every game object has components attached to it. This one happens to have a sphere mesh and a mesh renderer, and both of those work in tandem to give this thing its shape. It has a sphere collider, which means not only does the thing look like a sphere, but stuff that bumps into it knows that its shape is a sphere. That might seem a little redundant, but you might want a ball that doesn't bump into anything, a ball you could just walk through. But a ball that we want to hit the ground and not fall through needs to have a sphere collider. And oddly enough, there might be reasons why you want it to look like a ball but act like a cube as it rolls down the hill or something like that. So you could put a differently shaped collider on it. There's other components too. There's a rigid body in this case, which allows this to be operated on by physics and gravity. There is a material which gives it its red color. We'll learn to create and manipulate those in the future, but I just wanted to show you that all of the kind of properties that a game object has show up here in the inspector. The final main part of Unity's interface is down here in the middle. This is your project window, and it has all of your assets, which are the ingredients that go into building your project. So the game objects are all the things that are put into the scene, but these are all your pieces, parts, your palette, so to speak, that you could put into your scene. Everything that you've added to your project. And one thing to note about how Unity projects work is they are a folder on your hard drive. So if I open up my Unity project just on Windows Explorer or Mac Finder, here is an assets folder that looks an awful lot like this assets folder. The only difference is Unity stores all these .meta files to have some extra metadata that Unity needs. But if you sort of ignore those, you've got an asset store folder, an asset store folder, an audio folder, an audio folder, materials, materials, right? It's an exact mirror of what's on your hard drive. And why this matters is if I add an extra file in here on the hard drive, it immediately shows up in my Unity project. If I add an extra file from my hard drive to my Unity project, it immediately copies to my Unity folder, my Unity project folder. So if I wanted to add this extra JPEG to my Unity project, I could throw it in Unity, and then ta-da, it also appears here in my Unity project directly on my hard drive. Or if I delete it from there, it disappears from here. If I throw it in to here, it also appears here. And take note that if we do import files by dragging them into Unity, they automatically copy. Like this hasn't moved, it didn't go away from its original folder, but it is now copied here in my assets folder inside my project. That's just something to be aware of. It's a little different than working with a project file in, say, Adobe Premiere, where it would simply link out to wherever that file lives on your hard drive. With Unity, everything gets copied into and lives inside the Unity assets folder for each project. So with small files like a JPEG, it's really no big thing, but if you were copying a folder full of video files or something like that that was large, just know that you've kind of doubled its storage on the hard drive because you have it in the original place and you also copied it into your project. So best practices are to keep very organized with your assets folder. Like I've made most of these, or actually almost all of these folders, so that I don't just have a pile of files here. I can actually use them and know that I can find audio inside audio and materials inside materials, etc. So with that tour, we should be able to navigate around an existing Unity project and get acquainted with how it works, and maybe even potentially alter it by like moving things, scaling things, changing some of their properties. Moving forward, we're going to make our own Unity project, and I'll show you how to create both a sort of architectural geometric 3D space, like using cubes and things of that nature. I'll also show you how to work with these terrains to make kind of an outdoor landscape.